It's Friday, June 7th, 2019, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Patrick Hoffman, to lead a talk on repositioning, how and when to bring your product to a new audience. I am Jeremy Horn, aka the Product Guy, and I'm located here in New York City, and I'll be moderating today's talk. And with all of that said, let me hand it over to today's speaker for our talk on repositioning. Patrick.
Thanks, Jeremy. So my name is Patrick Hoffman, and I head up product over at a company called Udacity on the enterprise and B2B side. So today I'm going to be talking about repositioning and really what this means within product as I've been doing it, as others have been doing it. So as many might know, product a long time ago started off underneath as marketing and then kind of spun out into development, and now we're more or less a standalone thing. But within that, right, when you go about building a product, you tend to start with your customers and you tend to start with an objective, right? And as you do this, you may get something out to market. Often we talk about this as nailing the niche. And as you move it forward, you find that different customers have different needs, or different markets have different expectations, and so you'll actually need to make adjustments potentially to your product in order to better position it for those areas. So as I mentioned, I'm a product manager heading up product over at the enterprise side at Udacity. That's my Twitter handle, that's my LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. So let's make first and foremost like positioning and repositioning, right? So product repositioning is when a business, so in this case, mine is Udacity, decides to change either the overall positioning, which typically falls around things like the value proposition, the standard, this is a product for blank so that it does this and it competes with XYZ, right? Or for a target market for a product, right? So if Udacity decided to go from North America and now we want to start launching into Europe, that's a new market. And so we may have to make adjustments to our product in order to better suit that market. So generally, repositioning can coexist with improvements to the product, no changes to the product. You can simply change the messaging, the branding. Coke and Pepsi have done this quite a few times, or you can do major changes to your existing product. And that's something I'll talk through later on if we get to some examples of ways that I've actually done repositioning at the companies where I've worked. So first and foremost, though, why would you want to reposition? And so there's a couple key reasons, specifically around your competitive position, unlocking new revenue, being able to have a better focus in the market. This is often efforts that tend to be more marketing driven and making sure the message is resonating right in order to then actually unlock new revenue and do other items, right? So really it's often about alignment, and that's just something to definitely keep in mind, is that repositioning is about adjusting your product and your position in the market to better align with the needs of your customers and the needs of your marketplace. So in a narrow band, right, like repositioning, you can go really deep narrow, but it's also important to remember the context in which it fits. And so I'm going to talk through a couple areas around that, things like the 4-fit growth model, the crossing the chasm, and also the 3 phases or also zones of investment. So for those who aren't familiar with the 4 growth fit framework, it's been written about a bunch by a person named Brian Balfour, who came out of HubSpot and is really paired with other folks like Andrew Chen at Uber to drive how product managers and marketing individuals think about these different types of fits, right? And so for today, as I talk through repositioning, the 2 that are most important are going to be product market and product channel. And so I'm going to go into depth a little bit on what those might mean in case those items are new to folks. So product market, this is one that I'm guessing most of us have actually heard about. And it's about making sure that the problem in the market that you're going after, right, that there's a solution, right? So instead of being solution-centric and saying, hey, I'm going to make this new WYSIWYG, you saying, okay, what's the market actually need? What's a problem that's existing in this market, and how might it go about solving this? And in time, as markets shift and change, as new technologies come out, there are new solutions that can become available to address pains that have persistently been there. For instance, Uber, when they came to market, the pain of ordering a taxi or getting from point A to B, that was a persistent pain. It's been addressed by multiple things, bicycles, subways, etc. Product channel is really getting down to understanding how you get your product out to market And it's really important here, and this is something I've seen a lot of product managers miss out, is that the channel is not going to mold to your product. So whether you're going direct to consumer via, ads, for instance, or search engine, or if you're going with affiliate marketplaces, or if you're actually going out with enterprise account executives or with channel partners, the channels that you choose to go with have very specific ways of working that your product often needs to actually adapt to and fit, rather than you trying to tell the channel how to go and sell your product. And that's a really important thing as well, particularly as it relates to growth and scale of your product. So the other model that really is relevant to repositioning is the one of the chasm, right? So most folks have probably read Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. It's a pretty standard product book at this point. And it talks about where you focus, really narrow up front. This is something we did a lot of at Social Bicycles, my very first tech startup. But then as you kind of scale out and get in front of more people, right, you reach a point where you've passed the early adopters and you now have to convince people why your product is the right fit for them. And that partly comes down to making sure that you've actually identified the needs correctly. Are you addressing the right problems? Because your early adopters may look past a lot of your issues because you're solving one core pain they have, while those in that majority will have a number of pains that they'll be looking for you to solve. And if you only solve one of them, that may not be enough reason for you to actually go and get picked up by them. Related to that, Jeffrey Moore, McKinsey, and Steve Blank, a number of other folks have talked about these kind of investment horizons, which historically was basically time is slow, and so product and businesses, you'd want to think about how you kind of, like an onion, you're building things out as layers, right? So you have your current area that you're focusing on, where you're doing most of your investment, but then you'll recognize that this at some point is going to, diminish, either go from cash cow to the point of being a dog, or just be something that's not as growing at the scale you want. And so you need to go and get a new breakout category, right? And so that's that phase 2 or horizon 2. And then as you invest in that, like that's say 2-3 years out, that's in the old model, then you're going to be building for that and positioning for that to have that feedback and eventually become a horizon 1 item. More recently, things like the horizon 3, what we've commonly talked about as being disruptive products, disruptive market and shifts there, those have become a lot easier to do. And so a lot of people have been writing recently about how it's no longer a funnel where you're going horizon 1, horizon 2, horizon 3, but really now horizon 1 and horizon 3 can happen pretty much simultaneously and then shift into those phases between. And so repositioning is also really key here, because as you can be disrupted or go about disrupting others really fast, how you position your product is incredibly key to how you do that. It's not just making a technological improvement, but it's a positioning improvement, how you communicate, and again, how you work with the channel to get it out to market. So one final framework that kind of fits in here and why repositioning is really key, and this is more just something to watch out for, is that this idea of dominant logic, right? And so you may see this happen often in much larger companies, but it also happens in small companies. And it basically falls into this fallacy of people believing that what worked here, that could be what worked in this market, what worked in this city, what worked for this set of customers, is going to obviously work over in this other market, city, or set of customers. And that's just not actually the case in many ways. There are times when that will happen, but more often than not, as a product leader, you really need to put in place a method for feedback and do that in partnership with your marketing leaders and your sales leaders to understand, as you move your product into a new market or into a new segment, what are the specific needs that come up in those areas? And while doing that, you can then fall into a trap of just building exactly what people tell you to build. And that's something folks talk about as being the product death spiral. You definitely don't want to end up there. So it's important to always balance between the feedback that you're hearing and the actual vision you've had for that product that you were building, right? And I'll touch on this a bit later in one of the other case studies. So for me personally, when I think about positioning and repositioning and my product, I like to think about it as my product is going on a journey. And so, pretend you're Columbus or Galileo or not Galileo, but another person out there, right, on a ship, and you're sailing, right? As you go, you're going to meet new people, you're going to meet new needs. And so you may have nailed it perfectly, right? You may have known how to come ashore in the Americas and interact with people and trade with them. But as you start heading out into different waters, you'll encounter people that have different needs, right? Different currencies, different use cases, different pricing expectations. They may have different regulations. Definitely if you're in the software space these days, GDPR has become a real thing. How we deal with data privacy is also a real thing. On the hardware side, you get into more specific regulations around hardware that are incredibly important, and they shift geography to geography, right? So beyond the base things of like language and currency, you may also then start getting legal regulations, financial regulations that come into play and have an impact on your product and how you need to then adjust the positioning of your product to suit that market, so you continue to drive that growth, right? If that's your objective. And so it's important, and this gets back to those horizons, right? That you can see where you want to be going, and it's important to identify future opportunities that you'll want to go after, that you may be positioning your product for, that in 2 years it will be there. But in order to get there, you need to go after specific initiatives today in order to unlock that future opportunity. So that's kind of how I've been thinking about products and positioning, how I'm always, moving my product through the market and understanding how it needs to adapt and respond to changes in my market, changes in technology, changes in new entrants to my marketplace, or moves made by competitors. And that's something that really, as you level up in your product leadership career, it's really critical that you start thinking about your product at that level and as a strategic aspect of your business. So I'm going to walk through a couple examples from my career and then go through one really deep case study about the most recent one I've done, which was getting a consumer product that was built out at Udacity to be something that's actually a fit for an enterprise market and the enterprise customer needs. So the three companies I'm going to look at are Social Bicycles, Super Pedestrian, and my Udacity for Enterprise experience. Social Bicycles was a bike share company. I joined them back in 2012, and I'm going to talk a bit about the changes that we did while I was there, and then some of the ones that continued after, just to show how important positioning and repositioning is to businesses as you continue to kind of find that spot in the market that really works for you to scale and grow. And then Super Pedestrian as well, as it relates to finding the right channel and how important the channel is for your product. So for Social Bicycles, when I first joined them in 2012, this is kind of what the website looked like, and they were pretty much just a bike. And they were pitching it as being the a mobile, accessible bike share that could lock up to any existing infrastructure. You don't have to go and spend thousands of dollars, like pretty much it was 10x at the time, on things like City Bike. You should instead come and use this amazing new technological innovation, right? And that was, okay. It was an idea in the market and something we could take and pitch. And certainly some customers were attracted to that because they couldn't afford to be spending things like $10,000 per bike to roll out a bike share program, but they really recognized the value that having bike share in their area could bring, whether it's to their residents, to their workers, et cetera. And so as we really started doing work on the product and getting in front of more customers after that, initial adoption of customers, right, we started going out to market and going to market via RFPs and other methods and listening to them and really reframing ourselves from being, okay, we're just a technology, right? And we expect people to come to our door banging it down just to get this thing. We need to actually think about who we're going after and what their needs are, right? And so in early 2013, we really refocused and targeted around 4 types of customer segments that we felt our product could be a fit for. So residential, municipal, university, and then corporate, right? And so each of those to us was a customer that we could sell into, but customers that had specific needs, right? So in a residential area, they may not care as much about kiosks or accessibility so that you have additional methods beyond cell phones for accessing. Similar context within universities. And then corporate, they don't want to have it be open to everyone. They want it limited access, et cetera. They want to communicate things. And basically each segment had its own needs that we then have to adapt the product or work with the messaging of the product so that it lands well with those segments. And so in doing so, we ended up, finding ways to get that feedback from the market and listening to them. And in so doing, we started repositioning what the product was and that meant making at times both major and intermediate adjustments to the product, right? So major changes that we started making were around basic things like how secure the cables were attached, how securely the bikes, the pieces were actually locked in on it, but also going after other physical elements such as building up racks and also partnering with kiosk manufacturers so that we could effectively roll out what looked exactly like a city bike station or a Barclays bike station, but was actually powered by social bicycles. And so, a lot of that then meant changes for understanding the operators and the people we were going to. So, we started off initially direct to the customer and selling to them, but over time we built out partnerships with bike share operators so that they became our channel into the marketplace. And as we did that, in addition to having municipalities or universities giving us requirements and saying what they needed, we also had these operators having expectations about how we build our product, how we land that product to them, how easy it is to understand how to use it, et cetera. And so we really did a lot of work around that, changing out the bikes, the electronics, but also finding ways to actually build up bike racks that we could land into markets and kiosks that we could land into markets, so that really it was just completely different product in areas where customers expected it to be a different product. And so, all of that work from basically 2012 into 2014 was really hard, really amazing work, and made it so our product could start winning 7-figure RFPs and unlocking bike share and helping change people's lives by giving them access to just really fantastic bikes that were affordable, that allowed cities to get more bikes out there, which meant more positive impact for the community and the residents. And so between the end of 2014, so basically starting into 2015 and then 2017, it was really all about scale, right? So at that point, as a product, we'd unlocked how to talk to and how to serve those different segments. We really just started pushing to market. Now it's important to recognize that at the time, that's again just primarily in the North Americas, but we started entertaining what is it to bring our product in to other geos. And so in doing so with that, localization, other things started to come up as well. So later on in 2017, I'm no longer at the company, but I know as I was heading out, we had started initiatives around electric mobility. And so really in 2017, as well as we had started around how to actually operate and run our own systems, because we started doing some experiments with that and found that it was actually far more lucrative for our company to do that, although it went against a little bit of what our technical insights were. We weren't trained as operators necessarily, although we thought like them really well. So between the 2015 heading into 2017, the company really went after understanding what it is to be a bike share operator, as well as the recognizing the changing need of consumers, right? So that as you go into cities where it's not flat or where people are maybe not as used to riding bicycles, electric mobility really became a winning trend and a wave, right? And that's another thing to, as a product person, to think about, is the waves that are going to be impacting your product in the marketplace that you're in. And so the team went after electric mobility, launched their own systems, actually did a major rebrand, going from being social bicycles to being jump bikes. And in so doing, just unlocked incredible growth, incredible brand reputation, and incredible partnerships, right? And so they opened up a partnership with Uber, and then very soon after, Uber actually acquired them. And so in 2018, Uber acquired Jump Bikes and said, hey, this technology is fantastic. How can we apply this technology within our larger space where we know how to distribute out to the market? We now have these different cities that we operate. We know how to partner with these municipalities. We know how to launch products at scale that aren't necessarily going through RFPs, that aren't necessarily going through a 5-year contract, but are now balancing that play, right? And so as they did that, right, then Uber and Jump started thinking about, okay, this is awesome, but what other needs do we have? And do all customers know how to ride a bicycle? And it turns out that no, not everybody actually does know how to ride a bicycle and is comfortable necessarily riding an electric bicycle. But around that same time, Bird and others had jumped up, and people responded really well to this idea of scooters, right? It's a stable platform. You're not having to move on it. You can hop right off, et cetera. And so Jump and the team there became really responsive, and they started repositioning it so they have additional product offerings to go after this last mile mobility problem, and to really do it with something that's more approachable than a bicycle, and something that's pretty much just akin to hopping into another person's car, something super easy. And that's kind of where that is now. So another product, and this is really around the channel that I worked on, and a lot of lessons here about the product channel fit, was that we had this product called the Copenhagen Wheel, and it had come out of a research lab at MIT. It had done a pre-order campaign, getting thousands upon thousands of people ordering it within the first week. And so we're like, wow, awesome, fantastic demand for this, effectively an electric wheel that you put onto a bicycle and instantly turns it into a beautiful electric bike that fits you. But as the product got developed, right, it started off being just a single speed wheel. And then we started getting feedback from the market about, well, what about this bike? What about that bike? And so we recognized that even if just staying within the bounds of doing a wheel, we needed to provide something that actually fit a larger cross-section of the market, while also recognizing that bicycles weren't a fixed thing. So as bicycles developed, they changed, right? So 10 years ago, perhaps rim brakes were really common. Those are the caliper type brakes that grab the rim of the bicycle wheel. But more and more manufacturers are switching over to disc brakes, which are actually at the hub, so where the bicycle wheel connects to the frame, right? And so as that changes, those changes in bicycles then would have an impact on our wheel, and would have an impact on what amount of the market we could actually address with our product, which was the wheel. And so as we started doing that, right, we went from that single speed product, we headed towards more of a multi-speed product. We started repositioning it messaging wise to be about being a riding companion. But ultimately we found that, okay, we could get this out and we could educate people. But as we listened to the market, what we really heard was that more people really just wanted to get the problem of mobility, of easier mobility solved. And so they really weren't looking to take an existing bike they had or have to go find a bike to put a wheel on. Although there was a niche audience that absolutely wanted that, and those were early adopters, that was not what the mainstream market wanted. And so as we identified what the mainstream market wanted and we went past it being just a wheel, we started to recognize that really they just want that vehicle. And in wanting a vehicle, well, our core competency wasn't producing a bicycle, right? There are dozens, tens of dozens of companies out there that just produce fantastic, amazing bicycles. And granted, most of them are manufactured at the same factories in certain countries, but there's different brands, different styles, different looks, different fits, finishes, etc. And so what we determined was that while we had tried to go this direct-to-consumer model of just pushing the wheel out there and getting in front of people via events and ads and other mechanisms, really to hit our goal, which was to transform how people were moving around, we had to actually revisit one of our core assumptions, which was that we would not go to market with the channel and we would bypass that in order to pass savings on to customers. And so instead, we determined we needed to actually work with bike shops, so those who actually build up bicycles and then maintain them for people in their local area, as well as bicycle OEMs, so original equipment manufacturers. And so what we ended up doing was identifying key partners in those different areas, right, and understanding what was then in it for them and why they would want to work with us, but also which of those we wanted to work with to better accelerate our sales and our growth in order to scale our impact. And so in doing that, we ended up partnering with these companies, putting together packages of bicycles that now you could pick just that vehicle and buy that from us. But we would actually buy the bicycle from the OEM. We would ship these things together to a bike shop that we pair with. They would put it together, assemble it, and then get our customers up and riding, and then be that front line from us to the customer to really help serve them in case there's any issues with the wheel or with the bicycle. Again, taking things that were not our technical competency and finding partners and ways to bring that experience to market in ways that we knew our customers wanted. So then that was basically where they were in the end of 2015 and heading into 2016. Again, this shows the impact of market forces, right? So around the same time that birds started popping up in 2017 and starting to have impacts on electric mobility for folks like Jump and social bicycles, that also started having impact on companies like Super Pedestrian. Because Super Pedestrian started to revisit who they were and say, hey, so we have this product, right? And it's amazing and it's wonderful, but our core competency is making this amazing product. Our core competency isn't necessarily how we get it to market via either direct to consumer or channel. We're okay at it, but it's not our best thing, right? So given that all of these new companies, Uber, Lyft, et cetera, Limebike, have a need for really solid, amazing electric products, is there something that we can do to go after this space so that we make the core product, but we rely on these partners to distribute and to get this out into actual consumers' hands so that we have that impact we were looking for, right? Because at the end of the day, the impact was to get fewer people to use cars and get more people to use lighter modes of mobility. And so that's really where the company has been since, and saying in that area, then our core specialty is the tech, and our core specialty is the software and how to actually understand electric vehicles inside of a framework at scale, right? And so ending up very similar to Ninebot, which was a company that bought Segway, but heading into that space where really we become an OEM partnering with larger companies. So therefore selling into businesses and not selling to consumers. And that's kind of dovetails into how I'm going to talk through the Udacity case, where really the question of like these, who you're buying, who is buying your product and who's using it, ends up having a really significant impact on the products you build and how you bring those to market. So for Udacity, right, it's a direct-to-consumer product. It started off way back in the 2012 area as being one of the first massively open online courses. So basically, instead of 10 people getting to hear folks like Sebastian Thrun or Andrew Ning talk about artificial intelligence, they could address tens of thousands of people. And so it was a very open, free model that then converted over into a direct-to-consumer model around skills attainment and really helping people get jobs, right? Job readiness was really the message and the driving mission as part of democratizing education that Udacity had when I joined them in 2017. And I joined them in order to take that product and find ways to actually make it the right fit for an enterprise audience. And so an enterprise audience being defined here is really things like the Global 2000. And so when I first got to Udacity, right, they had elements of their business and product that were targeted at a B2B type audience, in part because they'd done explorations around that, right? So they thought in terms of corporate training, they thought in terms of hiring talent, but they weren't entirely sure what their value prop was, and they were mostly just responding to inbound inquiries, right? They weren't having a decided vision of what they were going to market, et cetera. And so what we ended up doing was working through that. Who do we want to be selling to? What is it that they're looking for? And then repositioning that product to actually better suit that audience, to speak to that audience, and then to actually build out features and tools that make sense for that audience. And so we ended up switching and heading towards a more differentiated approach that was more around the skills attainment, the managed experience, the ability to tailor the content and the learning paths, so that it wasn't just buying off-the-shelf products from consumer, but really buying a tailored fit to the needs of the business, right? And so we ended up repositioning the product and just unlocking rapid growth for our business, right? And we ended up building out dashboards and tools, because ultimately, when selling into the enterprise, it wasn't just selling the content and the upskilling, it was also selling the means to manage those skills attainment, those skills programs at scale within very large companies, right? So, Global 2000, we're talking companies that are 50,000 employees to 300,000 plus employees. And managing programs or having tooling going on in that space is just wildly different than when it's an individual consumer or when it's a team-based product, which is what a lot of the earlier B2B stuff was. And so really, I'm going to go deep now into that case study of how we ended up doing it, and through that also get to an approach of how to think about repositioning, right? And that's really the premise of this whole talk, right, is when to reposition and how to reposition. So in the case of the consumer versus enterprise, right, there's a few key market differences. Most importantly, in the consumer space, the buyer and the user are almost always the same person. There are cases where you may have people, buy an iPhone and gift it to somebody else, or buy a MacBook and gift it to somebody else. But most often, the buying decision and the use decision are bound together. In the enterprise space, that's just not the case. So more often than not, there's a buyer, which is usually an executive, anywhere from a line manager up to a C-suite type person. And they're going to purchase a product, and they're going to say, this is a product my company needs. And then they're going to have somebody they hand it off to. It may be themselves, but often it's somebody else who has to actually administer that tool and that program within their company. And then in doing that, and so like Salesforce is a great example, right? I'm the chief sales officer. I buy Salesforce and I have my team implement it, but then I have a Salesforce administrator that's actually managing that tool and that system on a day-to-day basis. And then that person is making sure that my employees are actually making use of that product so that I get the ROI that I thought I was purchasing, right? And so it's really a much more complex cycle, which means that products that go from direct to consumer into this space have to make adjustments, and have to make adjustments both in the feature sets, but also in how it's messaged to this audience of why this product is valuable. And so in terms of the repositioning, right, the first step, before you even get into like what's the product and things like that, you need to start with the business objective. And so in the case of Udacity and the enterprise side, it was really about unlocking growth, right? And growth measured by revenue for our business. Now, of course, when you do revenue and you do that type of growth, you want to make sure it's responsible growth. And so we then end up with different KPIs that factor in. So it's not just about average sale price or new annual contract value or recurring annual contract value. It's actually about other measures as well. So we care about our retention. We care about the NPS of our customers. We care about whether they're actually getting the ROI. So even if they have a high NPS, but we think that they're not getting that ROI, that's where our vision, right, for what our product is and how it impacts our customers starts blending in with the customer needs. And we want to try and drive the outcomes we're looking for while recognizing what the market itself also wants. But once you have those objectives, the next step really is to understand that market and your vision and the interplay between them. So in the case of enterprise, right, our market then becomes and became the global 2,000 companies. And really quickly by doing that, it started meaning that a lot of inbound leads we basically started setting aside and saying, that's not the audience we're going after right now. And therefore those people, yes, they're valid. Yes, they have needs, but those aren't the ones we're going to be focusing on with this particular product initiative that we're targeting. Because our vision here, while broad, while written to encompass all companies, we're really right now going to be narrowing down to the global 2,000, which is a massive audience set to deal with many of their own specific needs. And in doing that, we then move over to understand that customer journey, right? So we want to understand for the global 2,000, for those folks, how do they become aware of it? How do they get a chance to evaluate our product? How do they go through that buying decision? And then most importantly, how do they bridge over from that buying decision to a really robust onboarding experience so we know that they're actually adopting our product and getting the ROI that we want? Because without that ROI, we are not able to drive them through to get that renewal going. And really renewal is where you start unlocking that real revenue growth, right? You can sell to a customer once, but if you can't get that repeat sale going, it's incredibly painful for your product and your business to actually scale and scale in a repeatable and great way. So once you get that customer journey, then you start blending in other personas, right? So the buyer personas, for instance. And in our case, the more that we went to market and started talking with these types of companies, we found out that it wasn't as cut and dry as, there's an executive who's buying. There are different types of executives and types of need cases that were being brought to us, right? So the three that we ended up identifying were around a team-based buyer, an L&D-based buyer, and a C-suite buyer, right? And so if you look at this, you'll notice that two of these buyers are actually primed to move fast. However, the impact for their company and the impact then for us in terms of our revenue are quite different between those two. One is siloed and fairly narrow, one is org-wide, right? So like just picture that scale being anywhere from 10x to 100x bigger on that far right versus the far left. Similarly, both of those teams that are primed to move fast are also focused around ROI versus other items. The L&D, which is really learning and development, folks end up being, for whatever reason, bound more to procurement process, right? So they end up being very cost focused, does our company have this type of thing to offer to our employees, as opposed to, is there a business initiative that we have that we're really trying to target? And the farther we get into the market, we're starting to see that slightly shift a bit as these buyers actually kind of at times work together. So the L&D groups working with the C-suite, and at times like advocating to the C-suite to go after a larger initiative. But more or less, that's where we are now. And as we do that, these audiences then need to get a different message from us, because the L&D audience isn't really going to be thinking in terms of the ROI. They're going to be thinking in terms of, is this a learning product? Does this Udacity, are they way more expensive than Coursera and edX? Is it exactly the same thing to me? For a lot of those people, they see it as being the same. Unless they go really deep in the product and understand the difference and what it's actually driving for, they're going to just say, okay, it's the same, but wow, it's 10x more expensive. I'm not going to spend that. And they go another way. And then once we get those buyer personas, we started working back into our user personas as well, right? So as we go and dive into a team, well, In the team case, the person who is administering is often the same person that's getting the ROI, and they're overseeing the employees. But within the L&D and within the C-suite one, that's not the case. And so we have, again, multiple user types in place that we need to design for and serve. And you'd ask on the consumer side, well, their product is built completely for the person all the way on the far right, mostly in that there's a product to learn from. Now, does it actually suit them, the needs of an employee? We found out, no, it didn't. We need to actually go and invest in ways to make the employee really able to understand what they're learning so they can have that proper conversation with their manager and with the executives. But like, as we did it, we basically found that there were different needs we needed to do, different products we needed to build out, major feature sets to build out in order to really unlock that market potential. And so once we understood those personas, right, we went into deciding what to message and what to build. And I tend to think of these things in a 5-step framework of like understanding the context, the customer, et cetera, defining the solutions, weighing the trade-offs, going over then into developing and validating all these fun things, and then actually launching it, right? And this can be launching just the messaging. So you change the message of how you're talking about your product without actually making any change to the product. We've done this a couple of times at Udacity. And then choosing to know whether, is that message landing? Is it not? Do we need to change it out? Is that product, is that feature set that we landed, is it actually working? Or have the needs adjusted and changed such that we need to sunset that and replace it? And so as we do that, right, this is kind of where we landed, is that we did a lot of new stuff. We chose to keep some things, but in reality, there wasn't much to build from. So we were in many ways doing a 0 to 1 or 0 to sales, as some folks call it. And at the same time, choosing to sunset or upgrade key parts of our product. Now, we couldn't do this all at once. So reference back to that journey before, right? It's as you go along in your product journey, you're choosing to unlock different things as you go that gives you larger potential down the road. And so for us, items like engagement, they weren't one of our first things that we went after. Those came in later. Even admin tooling, like it was among our top 5 in the beginning, but it wasn't the number 1 because it wouldn't actually unlock sales. It wouldn't unlock acquisition. And for us, if we hadn't unlocked acquisition, it didn't matter as much how leaky the bucket we put people into down funnel was, right? So we started putting those two in parallel, but ultimately one was far more important than another, at least for a given window in time. And so really just want to close out by reminding folks about when to reposition your product, which is, if you lack that product market fit, definitely you want to go after ways to reposition your product. If you lack that product channel fit, definitely you want to think about how you need to make adjustments to your product or to how you're messaging it to the channel so you get that fit. Anytime you're going to go after a new market region, like that goes back to the dominant model, you need to understand that like if you're going to go from North America to Europe, well, those are actually different markets and the product you have may not land perfectly well there and you need to make adjustments. And so you need to recognize when you're kind of encountering these gates and put yourself back into that listening mindset, put yourself back into that, how do I set the objective and go through these steps to really reposition my product to hit the growth that I'm looking for? Because usually that's kind of the objective that companies have, right? They want to unlock growth, or they want to maintain growth, they want to hold that market. And so really that's the key thing at the bottom as well, right? Is, are you trying to unlock new market segment? Are you trying to regain traction? Because your product isn't standalone, right? The businesses and the marketplace around it and customers' expectations, they're constantly changing. And more, the pace of that change is just faster and faster. And so product teams have to really build up this model of how to understand, is their product actually still hitting that fit, or do they need to make changes? And if so, when and how to do it, where and how to do it. And so the how part, right, again, just going back to the case that I kind of walked through, it's, you got to understand your objectives. Usually it's tied to revenue growth, but that's not always the case. It could be tied to brand perception, to NPS, to a number of other items. You need to understand your customers and their needs, right? If you don't understand your customers and you decide, hey, we're going to like roll out this new feature set and we're going to charge twice as much money for it, but your customers, maybe that wasn't the right solution to their need, and now you've priced yourself out of the market, well, you could do real damage to your business. And so you need to actually like start with that customer need and be really clear on understanding, is what you're building actually solving for that need? And is it doing it in a way that's sustainable for your business, that's good for your business, right? If it's not being done in a way that's core to your business, then you need to either build a new core, or you need to consider if it's the right move to be making. And so then again, like, what are the changes? The product, the message, do you change both? And then following that 5-phase approach, you can get that change out to market. You can monitor it. You can listen. You can see if it's actually working, and then make your adjustments. And so really that's like my approach to repositioning, one that I've seen a number of other product folks use, and one that I think is just more and more product leaders should really get to understand this part of what it is to be bringing products to market and how to work cross-functionally with other folks in marketing, in sales, and operations, so that you can really unlock these opportunities for your company. Some things to watch out for, right? As you make these changes, so like on the sales side, right, you may just kind of miss the message there. But also you could end up making changes that have significant downstream negative impacts, things like your code quality, because you're rushing to get things to market too fast, that you end up actually having detrimental impacts on your existing customers or your existing marketing that you have, then putting that one at risk. And so another process, just again, I'm not going to talk about it today, but one that you should definitely read up on is around red teaming and really looking at your product and your strategy and the decisions you're making and looking for the holes in it so that you can then actually identify ways to fill those holes, to avoid those mistakes. And so red teaming is definitely a thing that folks should look up and read about. There's some good books out there on it. One's actually titled Red Teaming. And as well as go and really check out Brian Balfour's post. He has a really great write-up of how to understand how those 4 fits are working and how to look at your product and the market and whether you have that fit, that product and channel, whether you have that fit, as well as the interplay. Because if you don't get those 4 fits, right, like you can get product market fit, but if you don't get the other 3, your product and your business aren't really going to be as successful as they could be. And so that's my presentation, my talk on repositioning. I want to thank everybody and really like ask you to think about, do you have a product that you want to reposition, and how would you go about doing that?
Awesome talk. Awesome talk. I'd like to thank today's speaker, Patrick Hoffman, for a really awesome talk, a really awesome discussion on repositioning, how and when to bring your product to a new audience. And as always, today's presentation will be posted to our SlideShare channel. And also a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, aka the Product Guy, and everyone who joined us here today and the Product Mentor. And don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor anywhere in the world, like today's speaker, the product people of all sorts, please visit theproductmentor.com and sign up today. We can always use more mentors. And also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. And finally, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys all next time. Goodbye.